give you an idea of what we're going to go through on the next 25 minutes or so is, I work at Palo Alto with a series of global customers, and very much one of my focuses is nowadays how those customers are leveraging AI, how they're, well, coming to understand what AI can do for them. Not just in the context of a very technical, down-at-the-wire kind of security sense, but in the broader context of how they can use AI in its multiple forms, its multiple iterations, whether that's machine learning, deep learning, moving up to large language models, around the whole idea of cyber resilience. And to address that, really, we're going to look at three questions. The first one is, why is cyber resilience? Why is staying up and running in the event of compromise, in the event of something happening, such a problem? The second part is, how does AI help that? And then finally, what do we do within Palo Alto Networks as part of AI transformation? Really beginning that, the first question, why do organizations struggle with AI? The kind of the context, the framework of this is that very much within the security world now, we're almost getting into the point where what we do is almost data science. We're dealing with so much information. You know, we had alert fatigue back in the 90s. What on earth is it like here in 2024, data and how we actually handle it? So, why do organizations struggle to improve resilience? He said, as the clicker decided it was going to go to sleep. One of the initial problems is an expanding attack surface. So as we add more complexity to an organization, the actual thing that is exposed, the thing that we are using to deliver services to customers, to organizations, internally and externally, has grown. As an attack surface grows, the more we use, well, the more vulnerabilities that we find within that to go along with the threats that we see. For example, just this year, we had 4 CVEs published. One of them, which gave us a slew of alerts and information, was the Ivanti vulnerabilities that came. That made global headlines. What we found with this expanding attack surface was that gave us somewhere in the region of pushing 30,000 exposed exploitable instances when these particular CVEs came out. Within that, it gave us 145 countries were exposed within that. And finally, it gave us an uptick of something like 40,000 daily scans and probes initiated, looking for instances of this vulnerable surface. So the actual attack surface, not just seen as something which is a set of openings, a set of vulnerabilities, it can be very, very sealed, but all of a sudden, at that announcement, there's this increase in looking for those cracks. You know, it's a long time since we could look for vulnerable instances of send mail, as an example. Moving that along, I think I'm just about 5 feet too far from my laptop, so I'm going to have to stand forward. There we go. One of the things that we are well known for is that when it comes to vulnerabilities being discovered, when it comes to the detection, the management, the remediation, and then the ongoing resilience around those, we always publish threat research and threat briefings from them. Our threat research organisation is Unit 42. It combines threat research, incident response, readiness services, etc. But in any one of these cases, and these slides are available, just check on the QR there, and what that will do is take you straight to an ongoing updated briefing about the slew of Ivanti CVEs released. So there's one of the problems. We have an expanding attack surface. So when we look at cyber resilience itself, what are we talking about? 3 different steps here. First one is managing the business risk, okay? How do you look at everything from the supply chain all the way through infrastructure, through employees, through processes, right to essentially where the customer or customers touch that organization? How do you then address all those high-risk issues? How do you start to set prioritization? How do you start to look at what are the threats specific to my industry, specific to my organization that I should be looking at? One of the areas in this, when it comes to looking at the threats and the vulnerabilities, is how we actually address risk. And risk, obviously, is very often taken as, oh, I've got a vulnerability, that introduces a risk. Well, expand that out a little bit. You know, risk is made of not just the vulnerability, but it adds the threats. Who are the threat actors? Who are the APTs, etc. And also includes the impact. So threat, vulnerability, and impact is a slightly wider definition of risk. And it's the impact side where we start to talk about resilience. Excuse me. And finally, response. How do we go about responding to threats? So how do we take a threat-informed approach? One of the things that we do with Unit 42 as well on this side is say, guess what? you can find vulnerabilities, you can find all the latest CVEs, but how do you have a view of the particular actors, the particular organisations which are going to be targeting you, and how do you bring all of that information together to put together a framework, to put together a strategy that addresses not just standing cybersecurity, but also resilience in the event of whatever may come. So, a little bit of an idea. What are some of the CISO challenges that we see coming up again? And there's a really nice big list that you've probably seen many, many times. Everything from I need to improve my business intelligence, all the way through to hybrid work connectivity, which was the big one from lockdown, right through to operational resilience and things like automation. Now, when we start to look at how organisations address these kind of problems, we need to start looking at what are the technologies, what are the particular cybersecurity projects that come up. What we tend to find is something as simple as, or as simple to describe as improving business intelligence can start going through what about core data security? What about security of the applications which are holding that data? What about security of the people, processes and entities which are accessing that data? So that what starts off as a high-level digital initiative, when you then take that down to the CISO initiative, it starts to break down into subcategories. And then when you take that into the list of cybersecurity tools, now, if everyone's thinking there's no way I can read that slide, don't worry. This slide is more for illustrative purposes than you'll be glad to know I'm not going to describe every single technical function on this slide. The idea here being that when you start looking at things from, data classification to single sign-on tools to privileged access management, etc., what starts off as improving business intelligence then gets subdivided into application, identity and data, and then starts to get subdivided into what are the tools I can use for each of those particular problems. You end up with a situation that a typical industry approach, I noticed a few wry smiles there, which is always good. A typical industry approach is going to take 10 plus point products for any particular digital initiative. And that does become an issue. And the way that becomes an issue is, well, the need for cyber resilience. I'll talk over this a little bit before going through what we say, but there's a very old saying in this industry that I've been using for, must be 25 years plus, which is more data equals better intelligence, or more data equals better decisions, which is a very nice simplified term, but one I fundamentally, not quite disagree with, but heavily caveat. More data equals more decisions, it equals more complicated decisions, and it equals more complicated decisions at a greater speed. So one of the core things that we're looking at here, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, the idea of where does data science and AI come in, is that when we start to look at cyber resilience, and we start to look at the inherent complexity of what we have, we start to look at the requirements we have to handle that, the ambitions that we have, the cybercrime that affects that, how we then resource that, how we then sort of reduce the time to act. All of this essentially is, we all talk about data lakes. Think of it more as a data swamp. Okay, there's a huge amount of information that has to be churned through for any of these things to come across. So obviously, what we really want to look at, reconnected, is how do we make things simpler? How do we, to coin a phrase, enable our security teams, enable our businesses as human beings to address problems which are essentially created by machines? Because when it comes to speed, machines always win, okay? And at the same time, once we've got the simplicity, how do we bring down the risk and bring down the cost of doing this? It absolutely is 1 foot too far. So we look at something like a cybersecurity, a cyber resilience framework. The idea here being that, down at the bottom, you've got the technologies, etc. So, you've got data protection all the way through to threat visibility. You take that through process, access management and asset management. You take that up to policy. How do you deal with things like compliance and regulations? A large amount of my career I spent dealing with financial services industry and pharmaceutical companies. So the complexity of regulation has been a constant in my life. Then we have things like the organisation itself, the culture, the governance and structure. Has anyone come across the terms upcode and downcode? Downcode being very much the bits and bytes, whether it's the JavaScript, whether it's the whatever it is that you're doing at a technical level. Upcode is things like company culture. Okay, it's the governance of the organisation. That upcode is as important as the downcode within an organisation. Then finally, all of those things define what will the strategy be. And within that, what we hope to do and what we aim to do is look at, well, how mature are we in each of these approaches? All the way from level 1 there, which is we have no implementation. In fact, we have very little recognition that this is an issue, all the way up to proactive controls, enhanced management, high levels of integration, etc. So really within a framework, it's the building blocks, and in each of those building blocks, where are we in a maturity stack? Now, there we go. So the question is, if we've got these huge amounts of data, if we've got all of these multiple point products, if we've got the complexity of people, process, and I like to say people, process, and politics maybe within an organisation, how do we start to use the technology that we have to drive cyber resilience? And in this case, we're very much talking about how we do this with AI. So how is AI changing security? On the good side, we'd like to say if we can take all of this information and we can start to implement really advanced forms of analysis, we can actually start to put together multi-tiered, multi-dimensional decision trees rather than is it bad, is it good? Start to chain together pieces of information that I have seen and go through layers and filters of analysis, how we can start to do things like false positive balancing and things like that. One of the ideas there is with that you can actually charge up the security team to give them that efficiency. Now that's very much the side of detection. We'll talk a little bit about, 2020 when we actually introduced the first machine learning powered firewalls as an example. That's very much on the detection side. On the other side is how do you look at automation, blocking attacks without human intervention. How do you get to that level of certainty? Anyone who's been doing this technically for any time will have numerous painful stories of the false positives which disabled whole swathes of networks. I think one of mine was in the 90s, DOS attacks. Yes, I am showing my age if anyone remembers those in strings, which I saw at least one higher education establishment taken off the internet due to somebody using ... in URLs as a shorthand. Didn't go very well. It's picked up as false positive and blocks. So, the critical elements of harnessing AI. The first bit is the right data. Never has garbage in, garbage out been so true as with AI. When you start looking at some of the stories around the LLMs at the moment, when you start looking at the Gen AI, so the Chat GPTs, the Geminis and things, all the stories you may hear about data poisoning, model poisoning and things like this, you have to have the right data to make good decisions. An interesting stat that I read recently is that with the whole argument going on at the moment about accessing copyrighted data to train large language models, there's one prediction that the LLM models themselves will run out of data on the internet to train themselves on in 2026. Which is quite terrifying, actually. They will do that as long as we don't run out of power to actually power the large language models. But one of the first things is have the right data, because all the decision tree is driven by the data that you have. The second point is having a platform approach. Now, one of the things we've done with Palo Alto Networks is we've very much said, great, everyone knows that we do firewalls, but what about the cloud stuff? What about SASE? What about all these different technologies that actually make up a full security approach? So platformization in the sense that you have a consistent contact point, you have consistent integration, which is very, very efficiently delivered by having a platform approach to the security technologies. And then lastly, of course, is deep expertise. Of course, there's expertise within organizations, but what you also expect is expertise from the vendor as well. There we go. So, what have we been doing, and where does AI fit into the whole Palo Alto Networks AI transformation? The first step that we've been going through is deploying AI under the hood on the majority of our products. By AI, in this point, I'm talking about machine learning. What do I mean by machine learning? By machine learning, I do mean what people think of as data in, there's decision tree, analysis is done, and out comes a decision, out comes a piece of information derived from all the data going in. With machine learning, we're very much talking about a form of AI that requires quite a substantial amount of human curation. Okay, machine learning works really, really well with structured data. Any mathematicians here by any chance? Any physicists or engineers? If you don't have structured data, the conventional wisdom is when you try and do analysis, what you have is a mess. Data needs to be structured. Machine learning works around structured data. So what we do from the expertise perspective is all of the analysis, all of the tagging, all of the identification is performed by us. So once we actually start the detection process, whether that's user, whether it's application, network, endpoint, whatever it may be, it's building in expertise and analysis that we have done. Okay. Now, once we've actually deployed AI in the ML form under the hood, it was 2020 when we did this with firewalls. We've actually been doing this substantially longer, which I'll come to. As we move forward with our technologies, as the processing power, as the chipsets, as the actual hardware, as the actual code evolves, you'll see that we will move from leveraging machine learning in our technologies to what we're doing now, which is leveraging deep learning, which is basically a subset of machine learning. So whereas machine learning needs structured data for analysis, for decision trees to actually do what it's doing, deep learning, we can get all those buzz phrases like neural networks, etc. Deep learning is rather great because it does not require structured data. It can take unstructured data and actually start to perform the same task, the same process, the same verifications and output that machine learning can, but without the upfront load that you have to tag and have manual human intervention to start actually presenting the data in a way that the models can work with. So that's step one, a very long step one. Deploy ML under the hood, which ultimately moves into being DL. The next step is, this is all the mathematical AI. This is all the decision trees, etc. What about large language models? What about Gen AI? We all know Copilot. You know, Copilot is the buzz phrase for the last 12 months, etc., which is, can I have something that I can interact with, almost in a human sense, that sits with me to help me do my job? Microsoft Copilot being an example. What we do across our technologies is how about having that security Copilot, that technology that you can say, okay, Security Operations Center, what are the critical issues that I need to deal with? Okay, where am I in the remediation, etc. So on one side, machine learning and deep learning for detection, and then on the other side, the Gen AI to actually help you with the management, the analysis, what are the best practices, that kind of question. That reimagines product. And from that, the efficiency side of it, is a look at AI-first processes and operations, and that's very much where you get into the SOC side of things. And I shall do this one more time. There we go. So, I briefly mentioned the fact that we, 4 years ago, announced the world's first ML, machine learning powered firewall. What's not really understood is we have been using, as have the industry, AI broadly defined for quite some time. Any of you who are our customers who are using our wildfire service, which what it's saying is if I find something I can't identify, I pick something up on the wire, none of the local techniques or local intelligence systems I have can work out what it is. I can submit this to our wildfire service, say, right, take this, unpack it, execute it, and I'd like to analyse and make a decision whether or not this piece of code, this file, this whatever it is indeed something malicious, or if not malicious, of concern generally. And that was back in 2013, delivered as a cloud service. Since then, obviously, we've driven through things like CASB, we've done the XOR, so orchestration, automation, and response. 2020, as mentioned, machine learning powered firewalls. We then had AI Ops, which is all about user experience. When I've got things like SASE running, when I've got that, you have remote workers, how can I see whether or not there are issues on the network that affect the end user experience? We've moved that in now to two of my particular favourite areas, advanced URL filtering, advanced threat prevention, etc. If I can't make a decision locally, can I submit that piece of information to a cloud-based analysis to come back with information? AI-powered operations is finally truly known as AI Ops, and what we have as well is advanced wildfire, which is taking from that machine learning approach. We have all the new hardware, the new cloud instances it runs on, very much to a deep learning approach. Now, when we say the F word, firewall, a lot of people think that's great. You know, we've got ports, we've got protocols, we've got something that's got lots and lots of plugs in it. Yes, I still deal with hardware firewalls, and probably got people here going, I haven't touched hardware in 15 years or things like this. But when people think of firewalls, a firewall has this interesting aspect that it is simultaneously a networking device and a security device nowadays. In the world of Palo, next generation firewalls will say, let's go from all of that. Where's it coming from, where's it going to, and which door is it coming through into the network, to much higher levels of analysis, to what are the applications, to who are the users, what are the devices it's going to, unpacking to find out what exactly each individual packet that's coming through is doing. So what we want to do with driving the security element of that is on that base next generation firewall to say, well, what security services can be added to that? You'll often hear us talk about cloud-delivered security services, which is where we are really, really leveraging the AI side of things. Intrusion prevention, URL filtering, one that I'm doing quite a bit of work on at the moment, DNS security, etc., straight through to IoT, and then ultimately for management, something we call Strata Cloud Management. So across the hardware firewalls, the software firewalls, and SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, we're looking at deep learning on live traffic. Remember what we said about feeding that up into Wildfire? Once we get all of that information up into our systems, obviously it's anonymized, etc., but that then becomes, from the expertise side, the pool of information that we can use to drive further decisions, which is available to every single organization that uses that service. Moving some of this to the cloud is, obviously you can have local models for analysis, but once you start running analysis in the cloud, you do get massive increases in speed and processing. And also, we run on a global backbone that gives us ultra-low latency for that. So the ultimate end of that being that we have 95% threat prevention on common file-based attacks. But that doesn't happen without the ML and ultimately the deep learning feature. For anybody who's got your guys reporting back into you saying, look, this is what happens in our part, you can actually say, well, how much of this issue that we've seen was actually derived from ML decisions, and then actually look through, to actually look through the, should we say, the evidence chain of how decisions will come to. That's very much the detection side, but what about the response? What about the, I need to clear up from this? And this is where AI starts to deliver something that when I used to say this 25 years ago terrified people, but autonomous security operations. Anybody remember the self-healing data center? I remember saying that some time ago and people looking at me and saying, no, what you mean is the self-disabling data center. That was always a problem by not having the decision speed to actually work with this. Within the Cortex line of technology, which is very SOC point, it's all of this information, this telemetry, network, endpoint, cloud, attack surface, regulatory frameworks, internal standards, etc. How do you bring this in and actually in situ stitch and normalize that information that then derives at the highest point detection, investigation, and response in a framework of individual points of automation, all stitched together by an overarching orchestration policy? And with that as well, how do you then drive the analysts to become more productive? And that is very much where the AI side of things comes in with what we do. This has become a thing now, hasn't it, leading out. Finally, really on the co-pilot side of things, something that we've integrated is I can go into an incredibly complicated set of data and try and find what I want. I can programmatically query that data. But APIs weren't really developed for humans to live type into and things like this. When you start looking at something, the example here is Prisma Cloud, which is a code-to-cloud platform. When you start looking at the idea of a security operations center that, driven by Gen AI, can actually respond to you in a way and help you, that is very much where we are going. So, Log4Shell there. Hello, good morning, could you tell me of any issues I have? At which point the intelligence driving the data center can respond and say, yes, I can find that information for you. I can work on the first step of remediation, which is minimizing disruption, and then ultimately moving forward. What can I learn from that so that I optimize where I'm going? Internally, how do we look at this? Our internal approach, because we are very AI driven as an organization, is okay, it's a bit of a catch-all, but developing an AI policy. Well, one of the things is you determine AI exposure visibility. Okay, is our AI use actually exposed to the world? Can we use it for protecting data assets? How do we go about protecting AI applications? I'll warn you, we are going through quite a lot of information here. If anybody would like a good long chat about protecting AI and the threats to AI, I'm more than happy to have that conversation because it's fascinating, but takes about 2 hours to go through if you want to try and present it to people. We look at how do we protect new hardware in cloud scale. We look about how we identify and control access to AI. We look at protecting the underlying models so that those things themselves aren't corrupted. That's the garbage in, garbage out. And then, of course, securing the AI supply chain. A term that you may hear coming out more and more is the idea of a data supply chain. So while we can have things like a production supply chain or a work supply chain, think about data as having its own supply chain about where did it come from, do I trust it? It's a very, very fundamental part of using AI. So, really, the outcomes we look at, each day we analyse 750 million new and unique events. That's where the good data to drive security goes from. Then we detect 1.5 million new and unique attacks that weren't there the day before. That's on a daily basis. That's the AI and ML delivering the protection. And then every day we block 8.6 billion attacks. And a lot of that is driven by the AI detection. And finally, well, what do you want? A stronger outcome. So your checklist, at least, deploying AI. Document all internal AI risks. Know the ins and outs of AI data. That is a very big ask. Develop an external register of AI risks as well. Catalog all the services. Developing a company AI policy is quite a big one as well, because that's not just what services you use. I mean, I'm sure you've got plenty of people who can develop their own models quite easily, and what are they using them for? And also, of course, partnering with a trusted cybersecurity leader. On that happy note, I will reach out one more time, press the button, and go thank you. Okay, if anyone has any questions, anything like that, please come up. I'm going to be around all day. If anyone really does want to dive down the rabbit hole of where we're going with things like co-pilots, agent AI and things like this, I'd be absolutely delighted to have a chat with you. If anybody wants to come up and say, no, I think you're absolutely wrong and this is the reason why, please do, because then I learn something fantastic as well. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.